Hey everyone, Sparrow here. Welcome back to True North Sanctuary for a build that I'm very excited for. This is actually one of the first habitats I had an idea for, and here we are finally bringing it to life. Let's get started. Now the first part of this video will be an informal dome building tutorial. I did a bit of testing before filming this speed build because I wanted it to be pretty smooth as I was explaining the process. I did try with these glass walls, but I have a hard time building anything with grid pieces off of the grid, so I ultimately decided to build my own walls using a 4x4 meter glass piece and the thick painted wood beams. I did use the glass house walls as a sort of template to build my own though. Was it the smartest idea to build a dome out of custom walls? Well, with the way this part of the zoo is lagging, no, definitely not, but it does look pretty great in my opinion. Recolored to the same brown as in our fox habitat and turned my attention to creating part of the roof. When building something this precise, I make sure to have angle snap on because it helps with consistency. Rotated this beam 60 degrees and did the same on the other side to create a triangle. I guess this would be an equilateral triangle because each angle is the same, which makes sense because we're using 4-meter pieces on each side. It is also angled slightly upwards, about 15 degrees, so we don't have a flat roof. You can see me struggling to line it up. As soon as different angles come into play and I'm building off the ground, it's game over. I did consider filling this part in with more glass, but we unfortunately don't have a piece that fits in perfectly, and overlapping glass would be really obvious, so I opted for mesh to cover up the gap as perfectly as possible. Obviously, used quite a few of the smallest mesh pieces to fill in the smallest of the gaps in the corners. I always line up new pieces with the existing mesh and then slide it over to the gap that I need filled. Once I'm happy with this first wall, I'm going to advance duplicate it, spin it around 180 degrees with the angle snap on, make sure it's nicely lined up, and then move it across the circle. The dome is about 20 meters in diameter, which I had measured out with the glass grid pieces. Then I group both walls together and advance duplicate the whole group with angle snap still on, rotating 45 degrees to fill in the opposite axis and the diagonals. You basically want to create an X and then another X on top of that. Then you turn angle snap off and rotate into the gaps between the walls you've set up already. Because I did some quick math before designing this, these walls should slide into the gaps relatively closely. I'll link the calculator I used in the description if you're interested. I find figuring out the math beforehand is a very helpful starting point, and it reduces the amount of trial and error during the build. Now that those bones are set up, I'm connecting the gap between the triangles on the starter piece and the one next to it. My starter piece is always on the map grid, so it's easier to use the advanced duplicate options. Clearly still struggling with having multiple rotations at once, but we get there in the end. Once that beam is in place, I'm once again going to fill in the gaps with more mesh pieces, using larger ones where I can before going in with the half-meter pieces. Then I'll make sure they're all at the same height as the previous grid pieces, and then group this new section onto the initial wall we created. And then I'm going to delete all of the groups other than the initial one. Sounds counterintuitive, but here's why. Now that I've used our initial build to fill in the gap in the roof, I'll be able to use the exact same process to rebuild the dome, but with the addition of this new piece. And since everything lined up perfectly the first time, it will also line up perfectly the second time. So here we go, our new and improved dome. For this next part, I realized I hadn't marked the center of the dome at the beginning, so I replaced my glass house wall just to get the grid and found the center using a mud pillar. Now that we have the center point again, I can add a large timber piece to mark it so that I can create the rest of the roof. This central pillar will support more beams that come out from our mesh pieces and into the center. Worked with one of the rotations first to align the beam with the tip of the triangle on the side, and then I copied it across, making sure to keep that center point in mind because otherwise the rotation gets very wonky and it doesn't look very good. So, always want to make sure we're rotating around the same point when building domes, or anything circular, really. This time, instead of rotating the beams all around, I just created one section for myself with a 45-degree rotation initially, and then turned angle snap off to align the center beam there. I did, however, also decide that this portion of the roof should have a slight slope. So I used these bones to rotate one beam about 10 degrees up, not super steep, and then copied and lined it up on the other side. Now this part of the roof I am definitely eyeballing a lot more, but it is still very much within those mathematical constraints I set up for myself at the beginning. And sometimes Taking things step by step instead of doing all of the rotations and pieces at once helps things look more precise, even if it's more time consuming. Once that's done, I'm going to fill in this portion of the roof with wooden slats. I did consider mesh again, but figured it might be nice to have something a little different going on here that would also provide some shade for the animals, as Alberta does have a lot of sun. Which brings me to, why are we building these domes in the first place for these habitats? So the idea behind these is that they are old greenhouses that the zoo no longer uses that have been repurposed into habitats for raccoons and skunks. The raccoons in the old vegetable greenhouse and the skunks in the old flower greenhouse. We're obviously going to renovate them pretty heavily, but that was the initial idea for this build, and I have to say I'm very happy with the way it turned out. We added some mesh pieces to the top of the slats to make sure our raccoons especially don't get out, and rotating the whole thing to line up with the angle of the side beams. I do also go in and rotate some of the wood beams around to make sure they don't all have the same texture. Also recoloring, slightly darker, slightly lighter, you know how it goes. And then once I'm happy with the look of that, I'm going to duplicate the whole thing and once again eyeball the rotation. I did have to go in and fix a few slats that weren't long enough, but the better your first piece looks, the easier it is to copy everything afterwards. Now all of this is going to become a group so I can copy it across all at once. A quick 180-degree rotation and lining up the bottommost slat against the wood beam to make sure it's absolutely perfect before grouping the whole thing around the central point and rotating into place. I did also delete the leftmost beam so it wouldn't overlap, and also to decrease the piece count by whatever I could, I disabled climbing on this structure because that helps decrease your lag by quite a bit as well. So that's a good tip for you if you find your game lagging. And there we go, our greenhouse dome is complete. Going to plop the dome down into the spot I had prepared for the raccoons fit pretty perfectly into it. Measuring out the area with some paths, so I like to make sure those work properly before doing any additional stuff. Then I'll copy the dome to create the skunk habitat and make sure everything is lined up once more. Those concrete walls behind it will be changing. I thought initially maybe guests would have a chance to see the backstage area, but ended up doing something different in the end. At the front of the habitat, I edited the dome and took out the vertical beams, left the horizontal ones for support, but they don't really affect the view, and this was a quick way to get nice viewing windows for the guests. That concrete wall is going to come forward to meet the greenhouse in the back so that our keepers have access to the habitats from behind. Had to fiddle around with it a bit, but it lined up pretty nicely in the end as well. Next up are the habitat barriers, which are incredibly easy to set up because I just went around the edge of the greenhouse. Still tried to stick pretty close to the barrier because I like having a close estimate on habitat size when I go in to check the land area. The habitat gate at the back needed some editing to fit in nicely, so I moved a few beams around to set it into the wall. I should probably also mention that you'll be seeing me work on the raccoon greenhouse during the speed build, but all of these little things were also being done on the skunk greenhouse. I just didn't think it was necessary to show it twice. This is also a good time to mention that I lost about 2.5 hours of recording while building this because my computer ran out of space. No worries, I have an external drive now, but unfortunately a lot of the skunk build doesn't exist anymore, so I will definitely talk more about the idea behind the skunk habitat and how I created it during the walkthrough. Back to the raccoons. They need some water for swimming, so I created a circle out of the glass barriers and used the stamp tool to carve out about 1 meter within it. This didn't want to work for me for the longest time. I did about 6 test runs before I figured it out. Still not sure how I managed to get it to work really, but I really wanted a more man-made looking pool inside here because it's a renovated greenhouse. So whatever was in here had to be taken out, and then this pool would have been installed when zoo management decided raccoons would be put in here. Wanted to use one of the classical fountain bases as the bottom, but it didn't fit. So I ended up using concrete panels to create an octagonal shape around the pool. Lined up one side to cover up the glass first, and then copied it over to the other side to keep it symmetrical. Also going to give the pool a concrete base and later a small ramp, but to cover up the concrete edges and set the pool into the ground, I used more of the taiga rock that I have used everywhere else so far. Just these large flat rock cladding pieces that worked really well, especially when rotated and slanted a little bit. But that will go all the way around the edge of the pool and set it into the ground around it. Finally, it's time for some interior work. Obviously need water and food for the animals, as well as a heater to keep this area warm when it gets cooler out. I stuck the heater at the top of the central pillar. It's likely that would have been in here during this building's days as a greenhouse as well. For cooling the animals off in hot weather, some of the enrichment water jets will do nicely. As a form of shelter for the raccoons in case they wanted to go hide from guests, I decided I wanted to build a greenhouse nesting box type structure. So I tested how large the opening needed to be for raccoons to be able to use it, and then took it away from the greenhouse to construct it, mostly because things were just lagging incredibly inside of the greenhouse. This is a combination of conservation pack pieces mostly, the blinds and the thin slats, going to build up the front face first before copying it to the other sides. The structure will be available on the workshop as well if you would like to add it to your zoos. A quick recolor before we move on. This wall will get rotated to the side and edited slightly so there's no opening in it. Now this wall will make up the other two sides, once again getting rid of one of the pillars on the side so as not to duplicate edges. Really struggling with grappling pieces today. The floor will be made of more wood slats, which will be covered up with hay to give the raccoons something soft to lay on. And of course, rotating things around so they don't look entirely the same. I thought of making a flat roof, but liked the following idea more. So I started with a blind piece in the center and then some more slats for a steeper roof. Once again, rotating them every which way to make sure each slat doesn't look identical. Quick and easy trick for breaking up patterns to help things look more realistic. I also like to make sure they're not all completely aligned, so some might be lower than others. Could also add a few broken planks if you wanted, and of course recoloring to make sure they're not all the same. Then we'll copy that over to the other side and line it up before lowering it onto our treehouse body. Might hear my cat meowing in the background. Finally filling in this gap with some mesh. Kind of makes it look like a chicken coop, but I didn't want to play around with more wood pieces as we already have so many. And the more climbable pieces you have in game, even if disabled, the more it will like. We will, however, be using climbable pieces to stand the treehouse up and also to create a small ladder for the raccoons and potentially keepers so that they can get up into the treehouse. Very small angle, I think it's 15 degrees, and then more slats between the climbable pieces to give the illusion of steps. I'm not sure the raccoons can actually use those, but I will keep an eye out. Back in the raccoon habitat, I thought it would be fun to use the central pillar as the start of a climbing frame for them. These platforms are going to circle all the way around and up to a larger platform at the top, where I have placed some enrichment items to make sure the raccoons actually want to go up there. The rest of the habitat will feature other climbing structures and a small tree or two, but this is the primary focal point for guests when it comes to climbing. Tried to make the platform by rotating each individual piece around, but then remembered, hey, this is a circle. So I ended up rotating the first piece 180 degrees and then rotated both around the central point to get the platform looking nice before deleting the parts I didn't actually want. Climbing structures are actually one of my least favorite things to build, but I'm pretty happy with how this one turned out. Finally, some backstage. I've hidden 2 keeper huts on either side, but in between, since this is a long building, I thought it might be fun to add some holding areas for the animals. Building up the cage with mesh pieces and plenty of metal beams. The doorway is obviously not functional, just an illusion, but I recently saw someone using the tool rack piece as a door handle and thought that was such an amazing detail, so you'll see that in this build as well. Oh yeah, there it is. Such a cute little piece. We don't have a lot of those in Planet Zoo. I don't know if these holding cells are actually true to real life. I didn't use any reference photos, just an idea of what this cell might look like. But I think it turned out pretty okay. Excited to tour this area later as well. I've really been enjoying building backstage areas recently. Adds another whole dimension to the zoo. Let me know what your favorite parts of building your zoo are. I know everyone has their preferences. Lastly, some details. These damaged decals work wonders on plain concrete walls. Grunging up the windows at the front of the viewing area with more decals, adding some drains to the backstage building, and of course, getting ready for some lights and ceilings. So we are once again starting our tour at the entrance to the woodland walk portion of the zoo. Over here is where the fox habitat from last time is. And if we turn around, here are our exhibits from our waterfall episode. Now, as we go down this way over the bridge, we can see our repurposed greenhouses in the distance. I have taken out the waterfall, just for now, to help reduce lag while building, but it will be there in the final iteration of the zoo. Have some little seating areas. Now that guests have walked all this way, and as we get to this spot, we have a beautiful viewing window, and we can even see our raccoon in there, right in front of its treehouse. So there's the pool with a little rubber duck sitting in it. And we have the jet enrichments all around. We have the climbing platforms. I did also put up lights, so we'll take a look at this at night. Oh, we actually have a raccoon climbing right now too. How cute. I haven't actually seen them use that treehouse yet, so we'll see if it worked. And as we follow this path, we get more views. We have a slow feeder, we can watch them eat. We have a better view of that distant climbing platform. Oh, are you gonna go for a swim? Maybe not. Okay. So it's not like a very full habitat. It does look quite large for the animal that's in here, but it is actually about the size you need for 3 raccoons. So once these guys have babies, it'll be a which ones are we keeping sort of deal. And it doesn't have a lot of foliage either. There's a little bit of nettle, there's a single tree in here. Oh, I lied, there's a holly tree on the side here as well. So it's not super covered up. We have lots of space. And we can see them really well because there's nothing covering them up. Okay, over here we have some information on the greenhouses and exactly how they were repurposed. So I'm imagining talking about the raccoons on the left here and the skunk on the right, and then in the center here maybe just some historical facts about how these greenhouses were used in the past. Some education, because we all know I need to have some sort of educational thing next to each habitat. In here is the lost Speedbuild. These are the skunks. So, oh, hello, just emerging from the flowers. That's actually exactly why I wanted to put skunks in a flower greenhouse. Seeing them emerge from the flowers like that reminds me a lot of Flower from Bambi, actually. I guess could be called the inspiration for this habitat. I just think they're so cute when they run through the beautiful flowers. So, the raccoon habitat has obviously been renovated quite a bit because the pool has been put in. It doesn't really look like it used to be a greenhouse. Whereas the skunk habitat, I decided, was going to very much be looking like it may still be used as a greenhouse. So we do still have the garden beds in here. They're the same ones as in the greenhouse from episode 3, so the working greenhouse. So if you want to check out how to build those, I will put up a link in the top there. But we do have the garden beds, and then I just selected a bunch of flowers to put in them. So we have the twin flower, we have the azalea, we have sunflowers in the background. I think that's dwarf cornel. We also have some of those temple plants, pretend basil in the front here. And we also have a bunch of meadow flowers growing up from in between. So we have the oxeye daisies, we have tick seed, we have cornflower, and so on, to give it a more overgrown feel. Like, there's not actually flowers being grown here anymore. Obviously they're still kind of tended to so that the skunks don't get hurt or anything. We also have the burrow for the skunks in here, all of their enrichment items all around. And then I did also put some of the butterfly statues in here. They add a little bit of movement and a little bit more interest as well. I think they're so cute when they're just walking through those flowers. We also do have the planks on the ground here that keepers would have used to walk around just so as not to step on any flowers growing out. But they've become kind of covered up by the ground and rock, and no, they're not all there anymore. Those are actually sign pieces here. We'll walk in. So this is the Australia sign editable. I didn't write anything on it, obviously. I just kind of embedded them in the ground. So yeah. I'm not sure which greenhouse I like better. I really do love the idea of this flower greenhouse, but the climbing structures in the raccoon habitat worked out so well. So we are just gonna face through the glass here again, and we'll check out the backstage area for these guys. As we walk through the keeper door here, that is a keeper hut behind there. Just again, lots of clutter. We have a hose to help hose down this area if need be. A lot of the stuff I just stole from the fox habitat. And then on the wall here we have holding areas. So these ones are primarily for the skunks because they do have the nesting box in them. That's the same one as the prairie dog habitat. And then there's an enrichment item or two in each one just to keep them entertained. We have a spot to stack hay and other items if need be. We do have the vents up top because this is a long and boring building, and before I added those vents I was like, oh my gosh, what am I gonna do with this space? It's so boring. But that did help quite a bit. We do have more garbage cans on the side here to fill up that space. And then here are the raccoon holding areas. So they do have climbing structures within them. Each one is different. And then some enrichment items. So we have a box in this one, and then we have a little beach ball and so on. I did also use ropes to help with the climbing. I haven't really used that before. They were really annoying to figure out, but they do make it look pretty cool. Yeah, and then once again we have a keeper hut hidden over here. When we walk out these doors, we find ourselves kind of behind that big staff area from episode 2. That is currently the only way to get in here. Let's take a walk into the raccoon habitat here. We're climbing. Food. Playing right now? No. I haven't seen them swim yet either. Oh, I'd like to. Here's our tree house. I added a little patio to it. On the side it is a climbing platform, and then on the patio we also have a pot with a fern. I thought that was a cute touch. Hello, friends. They're so small and cute. We don't have raccoons in Alberta running around wild. It's a little bit too cold for them, but I have seen them running around in British Columbia before. We're gonna pop out into, oh, see, there's that leg. We're gonna pop out into overhead view so we can see how this fits into the rest of the zoo. We have our staff parking lot back there, staff area, and then here are our 2 greenhouses. Tried to spruce up that long building a little bit too with some green and beige rather than the gray concrete we were using elsewhere. I think it worked out quite nicely. Thank you once again for joining me at True North Sanctuary. Your support has really pushed me to continue building, to get better, to push past the roadblocks, so thank you so much to absolutely everyone who has commented on my videos, liked them, or subscribed to this channel. If you haven't already and you're enjoying this content, please do subscribe, it really makes my day, or comment on your favorite parts, any suggestions you have, or a fun fact about your own zoo. Also, if you have any questions for me, next week's episode is likely to be a long one, and I thought I might do it a little bit differently, AMA style. So ask me anything. Leave your questions either in the comments on this video or on the post in my community tab. They can be about anything, obviously nothing too personal, and I do reserve the right to not answer questions I'm not comfortable with, but it could be anything from what is your favorite color to where do you go for zoo inspiration. I'll be answering them all in next week's video. See you next time. Bye.